The morning sun rose slowly over the silver waters of Ochuok Lagoon, painting the ripples gold. Amara squatted by the fire, her wrapper tucked above her knees, turning a long rack of tilapia over the smoking embers. The smell of fish mixed with the scent of burning palm fronds, curling into the humid air. Her arms ached from hours of work, but the market in Yenagoa would pay her only enough to cover Chitty's school lunch for a week. She blew the smoke from her eyes and stared at the horizon where the lagoon met the endless sky, as if answers might float toward her on the tide. Hey, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Let's go. Cough sounded behind her. She turned to see Chitty, barefoot, his oversized shirt hanging loosely on his small frame. Mama, I'm hungry, he said, rubbing his eyes. His voice was soft, but the words struck her heart like stones. She forced a smile and handed him a small piece of smoked fish. Eat, my son. One day, you will eat until you are full, every single day, she promised, brushing his hair back from his forehead. He nodded, chewing slowly, not asking for more. The boy knew, at just 7 years old, that there was never enough. Behind them, the village stirred to life. The rhythmic sound of pestles pounding yam echoed from a nearby compound. Women called out to one another. Children's laughter mingled with the cawing of crows. But beneath the ordinary bustle, there was tension in the air. Whispers had been circulating since yesterday. A convoy of wealthy men was coming from Lagos. They wanted the only solid piece of land that remained dry when the floods came. Amara didn't know what they looked like or why they needed her village's soil, but a strange unease crawled up her spine. Whatever they came for, she had a feeling it would change everything. Ochuok was a place the modern world had mostly passed by. There were no tarred roads, only narrow paths of red earth that turned to thick mud during the rains. Wooden canoes were the only way to cross to the next village, and the only electricity came from a generator that sputtered to life for a few hours each night. But for all its hardship, Ochuok had a beauty that no city could match. The glistening lagoon at dawn, the soft chorus of crickets at dusk, and the way the stars shone like a million eyes in the sky. Amara had grown up here, the daughter of a humble fishmonger and a woman who had passed away when she was only 10. Her father's death had followed soon after, swallowed by the river during a storm. Now, with her husband gone too, the village was her only anchor. Still, there were times she felt the weight of the isolation pressing down on her, as though the wide waters were a wall keeping her from the rest of the world. That morning, she carried her basket of smoked fish toward Mama Ibi's stall to prepare for the boat ride to Yenagoa. On the way, she overheard a cluster of women talking in hushed tones under the shade of a mango tree. They say the man is richer than all the chiefs in Bayelsa combined, one woman whispered. And they say he doesn't come to beg, he comes to take. Another added, when men like that arrive, even the river will move out of their way. Amara frowned, adjusting the basket on her head. She didn't know who this man was or what he wanted, but she knew one thing. Men with too much money rarely came with good intentions. Somewhere deep inside her, a quiet voice warned. This was just the beginning of trouble. It had been 3 years since the night the river swallowed her husband. Yet the memory still woke Amara in the middle of the night. The rains had been heavy that season, the kind that turned the lagoon wild and angry. Uchenna had gone out late to check the fishing nets, their only hope for enough food to last the week. She had begged him not to go, but he had smiled, kissed her forehead and said, "If I fear the water, how will we eat?" Hours later, a frantic knock at the door had torn her from sleep. By the time she reached the banks, men were hauling in his canoe, half shattered from the current. His body never returned. The elders said the river had claimed him, the way it claimed men who did not pour libation before venturing out in a storm. Amara had cried until she could cry no more, her tears as salty as the water that took him. That night, the river hadn't just taken her husband. It had taken her safety, her laughter, and her dreams of growing old with him. Since then, she had learned to stand alone. She worked longer hours, carried heavier loads, and ignored the ache in her bones when there was fish to smoke or nets to mend. Chitty was her only reason to wake each morning. Every kobo she earned went toward his schooling, because she refused to let the cycle of poverty claim him too. Now, as she stood by the lagoon with her basket of fish, she could feel the air growing thick and heavy, like it had before the flood. Change was coming, not with rain and wind this time, but in the form of a rich man from Lagos. And deep in her gut, she feared that just like the flood, he might come to take more than she could afford to lose. The first sign was the distant growl of engines, a sound alien to Ochuok's quiet shores. Children paused in their play, women froze mid-conversation, and even the old men under the Udala tree squinted toward the dirt road that led from the mainland. Soon, the sound grew louder until a cloud of red dust rolled into view, swallowing the morning light. Out of it emerged a long line of gleaming black SUVs, their windows tinted so dark they swallowed reflections. The vehicles moved slowly, like predators surveying unfamiliar territory. At the head of the convoy, a man in a crisp white kaftan sat in the back seat of the lead SUV. He didn't step out immediately when they stopped at the village square, but everyone could feel his presence, heavy and commanding, like the humidity before a storm. Finally, the door opened, and Chief Obinna Adeyemi stepped onto the red earth. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, a sharp contrast to the cracked ground beneath them. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some villagers stared in awe at his gold wristwatch and the men in dark suits surrounding him. Others looked away, wary of the kind of power that could arrive with so much noise. Amara stood at the edge of the crowd, her basket of fish still balanced on her head. She didn't know why, but the moment she saw his face, something in her chest tightened. His eyes swept across the crowd and paused, just for a moment, on her. The gaze was brief, but it left her unsettled, as if he'd looked through her, not at her. By the time the chief spokesman began to speak of development and progress, Amara's mind was no longer on the words. She was still trying to understand why the stranger's gaze felt like the beginning of a story she hadn't agreed to tell. Amara told herself she imagined it, the way his gaze lingered, but as the meeting went on, she found herself stealing glances at him. Chief Obinna Adeyemi wasn't like any man she had seen before. He carried himself with the calm assurance of someone who never had to fight for space in a room. His skin was the deep brown of roasted kola nuts, his features sharp but softened by age, and his eyes, those eyes were strange. They held the kind of sadness that money couldn't bury, the kind that made you feel he had lived 1,000 lifetimes in silence. When the spokesman spoke of turning part of the village into a world-class resort, the crowd clapped politely, but Amara felt her stomach churn. They talked about jobs, schools, and clinics, promises she'd heard before, promises that faded as soon as the land was gone. She noticed Obinna wasn't speaking much. Instead, he kept scanning the crowd, his gaze returning to her like a moth to a flame. Each time their eyes met, she felt a flicker of recognition she couldn't explain. After the meeting, the crowd broke into smaller groups, buzzing with curiosity. Amara tried to slip away toward the lagoon, but a voice called from behind. "You?" one of the aides said, pointing at her. Her steps froze. "Chief would like to speak with you." The man's tone was polite, but there was no room for refusal. She walked toward the lead SUV, her palms damp. Obinna stood waiting, hands clasped behind his back, a faint smile on his lips. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes and the subtle scent of expensive cologne. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was deep, steady, but to Amara, it sounded like a door opening into a past she had never known. The village square was full again that evening. The chief's gong had summoned everyone, from the fishermen returning with their evening catch to the mothers who hurriedly washed their children's feet before coming. The air was heavy with the scent of roasted maize and the low hum of gossip. Amara stood toward the back, her arms folded, watching the elders take their seats on the raised platform. Chief Oromo, the village head, adjusted his red cap and cleared his throat, his voice echoing over the murmurs. "My people," he began, "today marks the beginning of a great blessing for Ochuok. Chief Obinna Adeyemi has chosen our humble land for a development that will bring jobs, schools, and roads. We have agreed to sell the riverside land to his company for this noble purpose." Cheers erupted from some corners of the crowd, but others, like Amara, stood in stunned silence. Sell the riverside land? That strip of high ground was the only safe place during the floods. Without it, the village would be at the mercy of the rising waters. Amara's pulse quickened. She scanned the platform. Obinna sat a few seats away from the chief, his expression unreadable. His gaze flickered toward her once, almost apologetically, before returning to the crowd. Mama Ibi leaned close to Amara and whispered, "Once they take that land, nothing will remain for us. We will be like fish in a net." The chief continued, praising the generous compensation each family would receive, but Amara barely heard him. A hot wave of anger surged through her. She didn't know why this stranger's decision felt personal, but one thing was certain. If they took that land, they would take the heart of Ochuok. And as long as she could still speak, she would not stay silent. That night, Amara could not sleep. The words of Chief Oromo echoed in her mind, each one pounding like a drum. Sell the riverside land. She lay on her raffia mat, staring at the wooden ceiling of her hut, listening to the soft breathing of Chitty beside her. Outside, the lagoon whispered against the shore, a sound that had always calmed her, until now. This time, it sounded like a warning, like the water itself feared what was coming. By dawn, she had made up her mind. She tied her wrapper tight and walked to the village square, where small groups of men and women were still talking about the announcement. Some were excited, speaking of the money they would receive. Others were unsure but afraid to question the chief. Amara stepped into the middle of the circle near Mama Ibi's stall. "And when the money is gone?" she asked, her voice carrying in the morning air. "When the floods come again and we have no high ground left, will we feed our children with these promises?" Heads turned toward her, some frowning, others nodding quietly. Mama Ibi stepped forward, her hands on her hips. "This girl speaks truth," she said. "Land does not return once it is sold." A few men muttered that it was too late to fight. The chief had already agreed. But Amara's voice grew stronger. "Nothing is final if the people stand together. They cannot sell what we refuse to give." A hush fell over the group. The idea was dangerous. It meant opposing both the village chief and a man as powerful as Chief Obinna. But in that silence, something shifted. One or two villagers straightened their backs, as if remembering they still had a choice. Amara knew it was only a small spark, but sparks, if fed, could burn. The day after her bold words in the square, Amara kept a close eye on Chitty. She didn't want him wandering near the convoy of strangers, especially with so much tension in the air. But children have a way of slipping through cracks no adult can see. By mid-morning, while she was gutting fish with Mama Ibi, she realized he was gone. Her heart lurched, and she scanned the marketplace until she spotted him at the edge of the square, standing before one of the black SUVs. A tall man in a dark suit crouched to his level, speaking with a smile. Chitty, small and fearless, was pointing at the shiny vehicle and asking questions. "Is it faster than a boat?" Amara heard him say as she drew closer. The man laughed. "Much faster. You could go from here to Yenagoa in less than an hour." Chitty's eyes widened with wonder. Then he asked, "Does the big man in white drive one of these too?" The guard's smile faltered slightly. "Chief Obinna? No, he sits at the back. That's what important men do." Amara stepped in then, her voice firm. "Chitty." He turned, startled, but before she could scold him, The guard straightened respectfully. "Madam, your boy is sharp. He asks good questions." She nodded curtly, taking Chitty's hand. As they walked away, he tugged at her fingers. "Mama, who is Chief Obina? Everyone listens to him." Amara hesitated, glancing back. Across the square, Obina stood talking to the village chief. For a moment, as if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met again. Steady, unreadable. She turned away quickly, her grip tightening on Chitty's hand. "He's just a man," she said. But deep inside, she felt he was something much more than that, and that frightened her. That evening, the air in Ochuok was thick with the smell of frying plantains and wood smoke. Amara was returning from the lagoon with her basket when she noticed Mom and Kem, the oldest woman in the village, sitting alone under the great Udala tree. The elder's headscarf was wrapped loosely, her frail hands resting on her cane, eyes fixed on the fading sun. Amara greeted her respectfully and was about to pass when the old woman called, "Amara, come." Amara approached, setting her basket down. Mom and Kem studied her for a long moment, as if weighing something in her mind. "You stand against the land sale," she said. It wasn't a question. Amara nodded. "Good. But you must be careful. This is not only about land. Sometimes, when the past comes back, it comes wearing fine clothes and carrying promises." Amara frowned. "I don't understand." The old woman leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Your mother, she was a quiet woman, but not without her secrets. Before she married your father, she worked in the big houses on the mainland. There was a man who looked at her the way a thirsty man looks at water. When he left, she never spoke his name, but I saw the shadow he left behind." A chill spread through Amara's chest. "What are you saying, Mama?" But Mom and Kem only shook her head. "The river hides many things, child. Some of them surface when you least expect." Before Amara could press further, the village gong sounded, calling everyone to another meeting. The old woman's gaze lingered on her. "Be strong, Amara. You are about to fight more than you think." The next morning, the sun had barely cleared the palm trees when a knock sounded on Amara's door. She opened it to find one of Obina's aides standing there, dressed in a neatly pressed kaftan, holding a brown envelope. "Madam Amara," he began, his tone smooth, "Chief Obina requests your time. He would like to speak with you privately." Her first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity tugged at her. She followed him to the largest hut in the square, where Obina had set up his temporary residence. Inside, the air was cool from a humming generator-powered fan, and the scent of imported cologne lingered. Obina sat at a small wooden table, sipping tea from fine china that looked out of place in Ochuok. "Please sit," he said, his voice calm. When she remained standing, his lips twitched with the hint of a smile. "I admire your courage, Amara. Few dare to speak against powerful men, especially in public." He gestured to the envelope on the table. "Inside is 1 million naira. Consider it appreciation for your concerns. If you choose to support the project, I can ensure your son's education is paid for until university. A better future for him, without all this struggle." The words hung in the air like the scent of ripe fruit, tempting but dangerous. Amara's pulse quickened, her eyes flicking to the envelope. That amount of money could change everything: pay debts, rebuild her hut, send Chitty to the best schools. Yet a deeper voice in her heart whispered that accepting it would be the first nail in the coffin for her people. She met his gaze steadily. "Chief, my future is tied to my village. If your plans destroy it, no amount of money will make me forget." Without touching the envelope, she turned and walked out, leaving the scent of his cologne and the weight of his offer behind her. The moment Amara stepped out of the hut, the air felt heavier, as though the village itself had been holding its breath. Obina remained seated inside, staring at the untouched envelope on the table. No one had refused him in years. People begged for his attention, fought for his money. Yet here was this woman, walking away without even looking back. His age shifted uneasily. "Chief, should I?" "No." Obinna cut in, his voice low but sharp. "She has made her choice." He picked up the envelope, tapping it lightly against the table. But choices have consequences. Outside, Amara's steps were firm, but her hands trembled. The temptation of the money still lingered in her mind, whispering of comfort and security. But she also knew that if she accepted, she would lose more than land. She would lose her voice, her right to fight. As she passed through the market, villagers glanced at her curiously. Some nodded in quiet approval. Others shook their heads, calling her foolish under their breath. By the time she reached her hut, Amara felt the first ripples of what was coming. Obinna would not take her refusal lightly, and the battle for Ochuok had only just begun. 2 days after Amara's refusal, a new sound filled the village, the thud of heavy boots and the low hum of generators. Obinna's men had set up a small camp near the riverside land, their trucks unloading steel poles and surveying equipment. The once quiet stretch of shore now echoed with hammering and the sharp calls of workers measuring boundaries. Rumors spread quickly. The village chief claimed it was just a preliminary survey, but everyone knew it was the first step toward clearing the land. Some families began packing their belongings, convinced that resistance was useless. Others avoided Amara entirely, afraid that speaking to her would draw unwanted attention from the chief or Obinna's men. Amara stood at the edge of the site, watching the poles go into the ground. Her chest tightened with each metallic clang. Mama Ibi joined her, shaking her head. "They move fast, child. Soon the drums will beat louder, and no one will hear our voices." Amara's gaze shifted toward the largest tent where Obinna was speaking with his engineers. He hadn't looked at her since the day she refused him, but she could feel it. Every hammer strike, every measured line was his answer to her defiance. The war for Ochuok had begun. That night, Amara lit a lantern and sent Chitty to call a few trusted neighbors. One by one, they gathered in Mama Ibi's compound, fishermen, traders, and young men from the canoe workshops. The dim light cast long shadows on their faces, each one lined with worry. "We cannot let them take the riverside," Amara began, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "If the land goes, we will have nowhere safe when the floods come. Our children will grow up in the water like stray fish." Murmurs of agreement rose, though some kept their eyes on the ground. A fisherman named Ebi spoke up. "The chief has already signed. Fighting him means fighting Obinna. Do we have the strength for that?" Amara looked around the circle, meeting each gaze. Strength is not only in numbers. It is in refusing to be silent. She proposed forming a committee to petition the state authorities and involve the press. Mama Ibi thumped her cane on the ground. "If we don't speak now, we will be speaking under the water later." The group left with heavy hearts, but a flicker of determination burned in their eyes. The first step had been taken. The decision to leave Ochuok was not an easy one. Amara had never been beyond Yenagoa, and the thought of traveling to Lagos, a city of millions, made her stomach knot. But the petitions needed signatures, and the state office that could review the land sale was far away. With Mama Ibi's encouragement, she packed a small bag, tucked Chitty's photograph inside, and boarded a rickety bus at dawn. The journey was long and restless. She watched through the window as the lush green of the Niger Delta gave way to bustling towns, and then to the sprawling chaos of Lagos. The noise was unlike anything she'd heard. Horns blaring, hawkers shouting, engines rumbling like an unending storm. The air smelled of roasted meat, petrol, and rain-soaked asphalt. When she stepped off the bus, the sheer size of the city made her feel small. Towers rose into the clouds, and people moved with such speed that she had to fight not to be swept away. Somewhere in this maze was the office that could help save Ochuok. Amara gripped her bag tightly, whispering to herself, I did not come this far to be afraid. The real battle was about to begin. Amara had imagined Lagos to be big, but nothing prepared her for the sheer scale of it. Glass towers shimmered in the sunlight, their mirrored walls reflecting clouds and sky as if the earth itself had been turned upright. The streets teemed with cars so sleek they looked like they belonged in films, and the people walked with a confidence that came from knowing they belonged in such a place. She found herself standing outside a mall larger than the entire marketplace in Ochuok. Inside, the air was cool, scented with expensive perfumes, and the floors gleamed so brightly she could see her reflection. Well-dressed men and women passed her without a glance, their shopping bags heavy with items worth more than her monthly earnings. She stopped at a store window displaying dresses so fine they seemed spun from moonlight, and for a fleeting moment, she imagined herself in one, walking beside Chitty, proud and unburdened. But the dream faded quickly. She was here for a purpose, not to be distracted. Pulling the slip of paper with the state office address from her bag, Amara took a deep breath. In this world of wealth and power, she would have to make her voice heard or be swallowed whole. The state office was a tall, gray building with armed guards at the entrance. Inside, the air was cool, but the atmosphere was heavy with impatience. Civil servants shuffled papers, their eyes glazed with routine. Amara approached the reception desk, clutching her petition. "I need to speak with someone about a land dispute in Ochuok," she said, her voice polite but firm. The receptionist barely looked at her. "Fill this form. Wait your turn." Hours passed. Her legs ached, and her hope began to fray. Just as she considered leaving, a young man in a neatly pressed shirt stopped beside her. "You've been here all day," he said with a curious smile. "What's your case?" She explained quickly, and his expression changed, from casual interest to intent focus. "My name is Tade," he said, lowering his voice. "I'm a journalist. This is a story people need to hear." He scribbled his number on a scrap of paper. "Meet me tomorrow. We'll talk about getting this to the media." Amara blinked, surprised by his eagerness. In a city where no one had time for strangers, this felt like a small miracle. Perhaps, she thought, the tide was beginning to turn in her favor. Back in Ochuok, word of Amara's trip had already reached Obinna. He sat in his private lounge, sipping palm wine as one of his aides reported her activities. The mention of a journalist made him pause. A slow smile spread across his face, not of amusement, but of calculation. If she wanted to play in his world, he would make the rules. 2 days later, Amara received a letter delivered by a well-dressed driver. It was an invitation to dinner at Obinna's mansion in Port Harcourt. The note was polite, almost charming, promising a chance to discuss the future of Ochuok over a fine meal. Mama Ibi frowned as Amara read it aloud. "Child, a snake does not invite a bird to dinner for the bird's sake," she warned. Still, Amara knew she could not ignore the summons. Declining would make her seem afraid. Accepting could give her insight into his plans. On the appointed night, she arrived at the mansion, the gates opening silently before her. The air inside smelled of expensive wine and polished wood. Obinna greeted her with a warm smile that didn't reach his eyes. She had stepped into his territory, and every move from here on would matter. The dining hall was a masterpiece of wealth. Gold-trimmed chairs, crystal glasses, and a chandelier that scattered light like 1,000 tiny suns. A table for 20 stood ready, though only 2 seats were occupied. Amara sat opposite Obinna, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. He served her himself, placing a plate of grilled fish and spiced plantains before her. "I admire your courage," he began, his voice smooth as silk. "Most people in your position would have taken my offer. You chose a harder path." Amara met his gaze without flinching. "Some paths are hard because they're worth walking." Obinna chuckled, swirling his wine. "And yet you've made enemies. Even your chief grows impatient with you." I can make that go away. All you need to do is sign the agreement. He slid a folder across the table. She didn't touch it. Ochuok's land isn't for sale. Silence fell, heavy and deliberate. Then Obinna leaned forward. Careful, Amara. A storm is coming, and you are just one woman. She smiled faintly. Yes, but one woman can call a crowd. The feast ended with no agreement, only a quiet war declared in candlelight. By the time Amara returned to Ochuok, the air in the village felt different, colder, sharper. Neighbors who once greeted her warmly now looked away when she passed. At the market, conversations paused as she approached, then resumed in hushed tones after she left. It didn't take long to understand why. Obinna's men had been busy. He had promised the chief and the elders development funds for the village if the Riverside project went ahead. The promise came with generous cash gifts, sacks of rice, and small envelopes passed discreetly under doors. For families struggling to feed their children, the temptation was too strong to resist. One afternoon, Mama Eid, who had once been like an aunt to Amara, came to her hut. "My daughter," she began gently, "this fight, it is costing you friends. The chief says you are blocking progress. People are saying you are selfish." Amara's chest tightened. She knew the rumors were planted, but they still stung. "Progress for who?" she asked quietly. "When the floods come, will the chief's money keep us dry?" Mama Eid sighed, unable to answer. The battle was no longer just against Obinna, it was against the hearts and minds of her own people. 2 days after the dinner at Obinna's mansion, Amara met Tade at a small cafe in Lagos. The air smelled of fresh coffee and rain on warm pavement. Tade was already seated with his laptop open, his fingers flying across the keys. When he saw her, he closed it and leaned forward, his eyes bright with purpose. "I've been digging," he said. "Obinna's company has a trail of scandals, land grabs in 3 other states, unpaid compensation, even a case of toxic waste dumping." He slid a folder toward her. "These are testimonies from people he's ruined. If we publish this, the public will turn against him." Amara hesitated, flipping through the pages. Each story was a mirror of Ochuok's future if she failed. Homes lost, waters poisoned, traditions erased. "If you print this, he will come after you," she warned. Tade smiled faintly. "That's what makes it worth it. But we need someone from Ochuok to speak on record. Will you do it?" Her hands tightened around the folder. She thought of her people, of the cold stares and whispered accusations. "Yes," she said finally. "If my voice is the only weapon I have, I'll use it." The small recording studio smelled faintly of dust and coffee. A single microphone stood between Amara and the world, its blinking red light reminding her that every word she spoke would soon be heard by thousands. Tade sat across from her, giving an encouraging nod. "Just speak from the heart," he said softly. She began slowly, her voice steady but low. She spoke of Ochuok's lush riverbanks, of the fishermen whose nets brought life to their tables, of children running barefoot under the mango trees. Then her tone sharpened. She told of Obinna's plans, of the contracts signed in secret, of how the project would choke their river and flood their homes. Outside the studio, the rain began to fall, pattering against the windows like a drumbeat. Amara didn't notice. She was too deep in her truth. "We are not against progress," she said into the mic. "But progress that destroys our future is no progress at all." When the interview ended, Tade leaned back, visibly impressed. "That," he said, "was the kind of story that wakes people up." Amara left the studio feeling lighter, but also knowing that Obinna would hear every word. The interview aired on a popular morning radio show, and within hours Ochuok was buzzing. Some villagers praised Amara's courage, calling her a true daughter of the land. Others, however, muttered that she was embarrassing the village and standing in the way of wealth. The division was sharper than ever. In Port Harcourt, Obinna listened to the broadcast in his office, his jaw tightening with each word. By the time it ended, he was already making calls. That same afternoon, rumors began to spread that Amara was working with foreign NGOs to steal the village's resources, that she had been paid to cause unrest. Anonymous leaflets appeared in the market, painting her as a traitor. Even worse, the chief summoned her to the palace. His voice was cold. "Amara, you will stop this nonsense. The project is happening. If you continue, you will not only lose the land, you will lose the respect of your people." She walked out with her head high, but inside, her stomach churned. Obinna was no longer just fighting in the shadows. He was coming at her in broad daylight, and the line between friend and enemy in Ochuok was becoming dangerously thin. That night, Ochuok was wrapped in silence, the kind that made every sound feel louder. Amara sat by the small oil lamp, reading through the documents Tade had given her. The kerosene's faint hiss was the only company she had, until a sudden knock at the door shattered the calm. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was hard, deliberate, the kind that carried warning. She froze, her heart pounding. When she finally opened the door, there was no one there. Only a small package on the ground. Inside was a dead bird, its feathers matted with blood, and a note in bold letters, "Stop or you're next." Her hands trembled, but she clenched her jaw. She'd expected intimidation, but the reality of it was heavier than she imagined. She locked the door and hid the note under her mattress, unwilling to alarm Mama Ibi. Still, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the bamboo walls felt like footsteps approaching. In the dark, Amara understood something clearly. Obinna wasn't just threatening her reputation anymore. He was testing her courage, pushing to see if she would break. But she also knew this. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. The morning after the threat, Amara walked to the market with a forced calm. Her eyes scanned faces, wondering who might have left that package at her door. She didn't notice the elderly fisherman, Baba Kara, until he stepped into her path. His weathered face was serious, but his eyes held a quiet fire. "I heard what happened," he said in a low voice. "Don't deny it. This village talks too much for secrets to last." He glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "My daughter lives by the river. If that company builds their wall, her home will be underwater. You are not alone, Amara. But you must be careful who you trust." He slipped her a small envelope before walking away without another word. Inside was a hand-drawn map of the riverside, showing secret fishing routes, old boundaries, and notes about the tides. She realized it could be proof that the land had been used by the villagers for generations, making it harder for Obinna to claim. For the first time in days, a spark of hope lit inside her. She wasn't fighting alone. The river itself had allies. In the dim glow of his apartment, Tade's desk was cluttered with papers, coffee cups, and a laptop humming softly. He had been digging through corporate records for days, his eyes red from staring at the screen. That night, persistence paid off. Buried deep in the archives of a forgotten government website, he found them scanned contracts between Obinna's company and a foreign mining firm. The documents revealed a shocking truth. The Riverside project wasn't just for development, as Obinna claimed. It was a cover for sand dredging and mineral extraction that would strip the land bare and poison the water. There were also bank transfers, millions of naira moved quietly into private accounts, some under false names. Tade's hands shook as he printed the evidence. He knew these papers could destroy Obinna's public image, but they were also dangerous to possess. He called Amara immediately. When she arrived, he spread the files before her. "This isn't just about Ochuok anymore," he said. "If this goes public, Obinna could lose everything." Amara stared at the pages, her mind racing. She realized they now held a weapon powerful enough to change the fight or put targets on their backs. That evening, Amara returned to Ochuok with the heavy folder hidden beneath her wrapper. She avoided the main road, taking the narrow footpath by the cassava fields. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of wet earth. She thought she was alone, until she noticed a shadow moving parallel to hers in the distance. By the time she reached Mama Ibi's compound, the figure was gone, but unease clung to her. She placed the folder in a locked chest and tried to sleep. At dawn, whispers began to ripple through the village. Obinna somehow knew about secret papers Amara had received. The words were too precise to be coincidence. Mama Ibi watched her over breakfast, her brows drawn tight. "Someone close to you is talking," she said. "Be careful, Amara. In this kind of fight, betrayal doesn't always come from strangers." The thought gnawed at her. Could it be one of the few villagers who supported her? Or worse, someone she considered family? The uncertainty was a knife in her chest. She knew she had to move the documents before they fell into the wrong hands. But first, she had to find the traitor. Amara spent the morning sitting quietly under the mango tree, pretending to be lost in thought. In truth, her mind was busy weaving a plan. If someone close to her was feeding Obinna information, she would make them reveal themselves. She decided to plant a false story, a piece of bait that only the betrayer would carry back to him. That afternoon, she invited 3 people she suspected most: Chica, the talkative neighbor; Musa, a young fisherman eager for quick money; and Ngozi, an old friend who had recently become distant. Over bowls of palm nut soup, she spoke in a low, conspiratorial tone. "Tate has hidden the documents in the abandoned cocoa warehouse near the river," she said, glancing at each of them in turn. "We'll retrieve them in 2 days." She watched their faces carefully. Musa's eyes flickered too quickly. Chica only nodded distractedly, while Ngozi avoided her gaze altogether. By nightfall, Amara's trap was set. All she had to do now was wait and see if Obinna's men appeared at the warehouse. If they did, she would know who had been selling her out, and then the real fight would begin. 2 nights later, the moon hung low and bright over Ochuok, casting silver light on the old cocoa warehouse by the river. Amara and Tate crouched behind a stack of rusting drums, their breaths shallow. The place smelled of dust and damp wood, the air thick with suspense. They didn't wait long. Footsteps crunched on the gravel outside, followed by the creak of the warehouse door. 3 men stepped inside, moving with the confidence of people who believed they were alone. One carried a flashlight, another clutched a crowbar. The third man, taller than the rest, barked orders in a low voice. Amara's heart pounded when the flashlight beam swept the room and landed on a familiar face: Musa. His eyes darted nervously as he searched for the non-existent documents. Tate tightened his grip on the camera he held, snapping quick, silent photos. They had their proof now, undeniable evidence of betrayal. But before they could slip away, Musa's head snapped up, sensing movement. The next seconds were a blur of shouting, footsteps, and the sound of metal clanging. The trap had worked, but now escape would not be so easy. Amara bolted toward the warehouse's side door, her bare feet slapping against the dusty floor. Tate was right behind her, clutching the camera to his chest like a lifeline. Musa's shout echoed through the building, followed by the pounding of boots as Obinna's men gave chase. They burst into the night air, the river's smell thick and salty. Ahead lay the mangrove path, a twisting, root-choked trail only locals knew well. Amara ducked under low branches, her heart racing, the mud sucking at her ankles with every step. Behind them, flashlights flickered wildly, their beams cutting through the dark. The deeper they ran, the narrower the trail became. Mosquitoes swarmed their faces, but they didn't dare slow down. Tate stumbled once, nearly dropping the camera, and Amara grabbed his arm to steady him. "Don't stop," she hissed. In the distance, she could hear the low rumble of the tide turning, the water rising to flood the lower paths. If they didn't reach the canoe hidden by Baba Kara before the water did, the mangroves would trap them, and their pursuers would close in. Every breath felt like borrowed time. Amara and Tate burst through the final curtain of mangrove roots, their lungs burning. The small wooden canoe lay where Baba Kara had promised, half hidden beneath a mat of palm fronds. Without a word, Tade pushed it into the dark water while Amara scrambled in, clutching the camera close. Behind them, voices grew louder, boots squelching in the mud. Musa's angry shouts cut through the night, urging the men to hurry. Tade leapt in and grabbed the paddle, pushing them swiftly into the current. The river was alive with the sound of insects and the slow lap of water against the canoe. A flashlight beam swept the riverbank, then disappeared. The current carried them into deeper shadows, but Amara knew they weren't safe yet. The tide was rising fast, and the river, though a shield now, could easily become a trap. The canoe glided silently into a narrow inlet, where tall reeds swayed like silent sentinels. Amara pointed toward a dim light flickering in the distance, an old fisherman's hut she remembered from childhood. Tade paddled harder, his muscles straining, until the canoe scraped against the muddy bank. They crept toward the hut, the soft glow of a kerosene lamp spilling through a cracked window. Inside, Baba Kara, an old man with weathered skin and sharp eyes, sat mending his nets. He looked up, surprise flashing in his gaze before it softened. "You're running from something," he said quietly, motioning them inside. Amara hesitated. Safe walls felt like a blessing, but her instincts whispered caution. In Ochuok, trust was a fragile thing, and secrets had a way of slipping through cracks. She exchanged a glance with Tade, both wondering if this shelter would protect them or betray them. Baba Kara poured them each a cup of steaming palm wine, his hands steady despite his age. "I know who chases you," he began, his voice low. "Obina's men have been prowling these waters for weeks." He leaned closer, eyes sharp. "I can get you upriver, beyond their reach, but it will cost you." Amara tensed. "Cost us what?" she asked. The old man smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I have debts of my own, enemies more dangerous than Obina. Help me settle them, and I'll see you safely to Port Harcourt." Tade shifted uncomfortably. They had come here to hide, not to trade one danger for another. But Baba Kara's tone made it clear. Without him, the river would lead them straight into Obina's net. Amara's pulse quickened. They were trapped between two choices, both carrying the scent of danger. Baba Kara's voice dropped to a whisper as if the mangroves themselves might be listening. "There is a man in Obodo River town, Chief Dangana. Years ago I wronged him and he has never forgotten. He wants payment, not in money, but in the form of a certain ledger I once kept for him." Amara frowned. "A ledger?" The old man nodded slowly. "It contains records of bribes, stolen land titles, enough to ruin him if it fell into the wrong hands. He believes I still have it." Tade exchanged a wary glance with Amara. Retrieving such a thing would put them squarely in another powerful man's crosshairs. Yet, Baba Kara's help was their only lifeline upriver. "If you get me that ledger," the old man continued, "I'll not only get you to safety, I'll give you the names of Obina's true masters." The air grew heavier. The stakes had just doubled. The journey to Obodo River town began before dawn, the canoe slicing through mist that clung to the water like ghostly fingers. Baba Kara paddled silently, his eyes scanning the banks for movement. Amara sat low, her scarf pulled tight around her head, while Tade kept the camera hidden beneath his jacket. By midday, they reached the edge of the bustling river market. Wooden stalls leaned precariously over the water, their planks worn smooth by years of trade. The scent of smoked fish and palm oil mixed with the sharper tang of engine fuel from passing boats. Baba Kara pointed to a narrow alley between two stalls. "Chief Dangana's storehouse is down there," he murmured. "The ledger should be inside." Amara's pulse quickened. Every instinct told her the place would be guarded. Still, if they wanted the truth and their freedom, they had no choice but to step into the lion's den. The storehouse loomed at the end of the alley, its wooden door reinforced with a rusted padlock. Two men sat nearby, pretending to dice, though their eyes flicked toward anyone who passed. Baba Kara melted into the shadows, leaving Amara and Tade to move closer under the cover of the noisy market. They waited for the guards to be distracted by a passing vendor before slipping around to the back. A small window, half covered with rotting bamboo, offered a way in. Tade boosted Amara up, and she squeezed through, landing in a dark room thick with the smell of dust and old palm oil. Stacks of crates lined the walls, but it was the locked iron cabinet in the corner that caught her attention. This polished surface didn't belong in such a place. She knew, without touching it, that the ledger was inside, and that opening it would trigger more than just a rusty squeak. Amara crouched beside the iron cabinet, running her fingers along its edges. The padlock was newer than anything else in the room, its surface smooth and gleaming. Tade slipped in through the window, his breath quick. "Tell me you found it," he whispered. She nodded. "It's here, but it's locked." From his pocket, Tade pulled a small metal tool, a remnant from his days fixing radios. "Step back." The faint clicks of metal against metal filled the room as he worked. Every sound seemed to echo too loudly, as if the walls themselves might betray them. Finally, the lock gave way with a soft snap. Amara eased the cabinet open, revealing a leather-bound book, its edges worn, pages thick with age. She reached for it and froze. From outside, the low rumble of voices grew louder. The guards were back, and they were headed straight for the storehouse. Amara's fingers tightened around the ledger as footsteps thudded closer. The shadows in the room seemed to shrink, pressing them toward the locked door. Tade's eyes darted to the small window they had entered through, but the sound of voices outside told him the alley was no longer safe. "They'll search here first," he hissed. "We need another way." Amara scanned the room, heart hammering. Behind a stack of crates, she noticed a gap in the wooden wall, no wider than a goat's path. Together, they shoved the crates aside, each movement groaning louder than they wanted. The voices drew nearer. Keys jingled at the front door. Tade squeezed through the gap first, pulling Amara after him into a narrow passage between buildings. The scent of fish and river mud hit them. Without looking back, they melted into the market crowd, clutching the ledger like a lifeline. The market was alive with noise. Traders shouting prices, children darting between stalls, goats bleating in protest at being dragged. Amara and Tade moved quickly, weaving through the chaos, hoping the crowd would swallow them whole. But a sharp voice cut through the din. "There! Stop them!" one of the guards shouted. Heads turned. The two guards shoved through the throng, knocking over baskets of tomatoes and startling a row of tethered chickens. Amara clutched the ledger to her chest, her scarf slipping loose as she ducked behind a yam seller's stand. Tade grabbed her hand and pulled her into a side lane lined with drying fish. The salty air burned her nose, but the narrow path bought them a few precious seconds. They could hear the guards' boots pounding the dirt behind them. Somewhere ahead, the river shimmered, an escape route, if they could reach it in time. The narrow lane spilled into a wooden jetty, where small canoes bobbed against the current. The shouts behind them grew louder. The guards were only seconds away. Tade's eyes locked on a canoe loosely tied to a post. "That one," he barked. They sprinted, dodging a fisherman hauling in his morning catch. Amara's sandals slapped against the planks, the ledger still clutched tight. The river breeze hit her face, cool and sharp, as they reached the canoe. Without hesitation, Tade jumped in and held out his hand. Amara leapt after him just as the first guard lunged. She landed hard, the canoe rocking violently. Tade slashed the rope with his pocket knife, and the current caught them. Behind them, the guards cursed, their boots thudding to the edge of the jetty. Ahead, the wide brown river stretched like a promise, but promises could be dangerous on waters like these. The canoe drifted swiftly, but the river was no gentle ally. Strong currents tugged at its sides, pulling them toward jagged rocks that jutted from the water like silent sentinels. Tade dug the paddle deep, his arms straining, trying to guide them away. Amara kept glancing over her shoulder. The guards had commandeered another canoe and were pushing off from the jetty, their paddles biting into the water with furious speed. "They're gaining on us," she said, her voice tight. A sudden swell lifted their canoe, slamming it back down with a hollow thud. Water splashed over the sides, soaking their legs. The river smelled of silt and something darker, a reminder that danger here wasn't only human. Tade's jaw tightened. "Hold on. If we can reach the bend ahead, the mangroves will hide us." But the bend was far, and the guards were closing the gap fast. The canoe slid into the shadow of the mangroves, their tangled roots rising from the water like gnarled fingers. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Sunlight barely pierced the canopy, casting everything in a greenish gloom. Tade slowed his paddling, letting the current pull them deeper into the maze. "Stay quiet," he whispered. Even the river seemed to hush here, its ripples muffled by the roots. Behind them, the sound of splashing grew faint, then stopped. Amara's pulse pounded in her ears. She could almost believe they'd lost the guards, until a twig snapped somewhere among the shadows. Tade's eyes met hers, sharp with warning. "We're not alone," he mouthed. The mangroves hid them from the guards, but something else was moving in the darkness, circling like it knew the river far better than they did. The silence in the mangroves was unnerving, broken only by the slow drip of water from the roots. Amara clutched the ledger tighter, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Then she saw it, a ripple in the water too deliberate to be the wind. Tade froze, paddle midair. "Crocodile?" he whispered. But as the ripple drew closer, a head emerged, not scaled, but human. A man, his skin the same deep brown as the river mud, stared at them from just beyond the roots. His eyes glinted with something between curiosity and suspicion. He held a spear, its tip darkened from use. Slowly, he raised a finger to his lips, urging silence. The faint sound of guards calling echoed from the river's edge, and the man gestured for them to follow deeper into the mangrove maze. Tade hesitated, but staying put wasn't an option. The stranger's canoe was little more than a hollowed log, yet it glided through the mangroves like a shadow. He led them into a narrow channel where the air grew cooler, and the roots formed a natural wall. "My name is Bako," he said in a low voice, his accent thick with the river dialect. "Those men hunting you, they've chased others here before. Most didn't make it out." His gaze flicked to the ledger in Amara's lap. "What's in that book must be worth dying for." Tade stiffened. "We're not here to cause trouble. We just need to disappear." Bako studied them for a moment, then nodded toward a hidden bank. "I know a place where they won't find you, if you trust me." The guards' distant voices floated closer. Amara met Tade's eyes. They had seconds to decide if Bako was a savior or a trap. Bako steered his canoe into a tunnel of roots so tight that Amara had to duck to avoid branches scraping her face. The air smelled of moss and riverweed, and the water grew shallow enough for the bottom to scrape against the wood. They emerged into a small clearing surrounded by towering mangroves. A cluster of reed huts stood on stilts above the water, their thatched roofs blending perfectly with the forest canopy. Smoke curled lazily from one, carrying the scent of roasted fish. "This is my home," Bako said, tying his canoe to a root. "No one comes here unless I allow it." Women and children peered from the huts, their eyes wary. Tade noticed the way their gazes lingered on the ledger. Bako turned to them. "You can rest here tonight, but at dawn, we must talk about what you're carrying." Something in his tone made Amara uneasy. Amara lay on a thin mat in one of the reed huts, staring at the thatched ceiling. The river was calm now, but sleep refused to come. Somewhere outside, voices drifted through the night, low and hurried. She strained to listen, recognizing Bako's deep tone and another voice she didn't know. "They have the ledger," the stranger hissed. "If Obina finds out, we're all in danger." Bako's voice was calm but firm. I told you they are under my protection. No one touches them until I say so. Amara's stomach churned. Who was this other person? Could she and Tade truly trust Bako? Or had they stepped from one danger into another? The ledger felt heavier in her lap as the shadows of the hut seemed to grow longer, closing in with every whisper. Dawn spilled pale light across the mangroves, illuminating mist curling over the water. Amara and Tade sat on the hut's small deck, the ledger between them like a stone pressing on their shoulders. Bako had gone to check the traps along the river, leaving them alone with their thoughts. We can't stay here forever, Tade said, eyes scanning the dense forest. Obina will keep searching, and now we know others are watching too. We need a plan. Amara nodded slowly. We take the ledger to the city, publish everything. But first, we have to find a way past Bako's enemies without being seen. Tade bit his lip. And if we can't? She clenched her fists. Then we fight. For Ochuok. For everyone who trusted us with their story. The river flowed quietly beneath them, carrying both hope and danger. The canoe waited silently at the edge of the mangrove clearing, barely visible through the tangle of roots. Amara and Tade climbed in, Bako helping push them into the current. The river looked calm, but the mist hiding the bends made every shadow seem alive. Stay low, Bako whispered, paddling swiftly. Obina's men could be anywhere downstream. Amara held the ledger close, feeling its weight as more than just paper. It was proof, lifeline, and target all at once. Tade's eyes darted ahead, scanning for movement along the banks. The first obstacle appeared as a fallen tree partially blocking the channel. They maneuvered carefully, the canoe scraping branches, water splashing over their legs. Each paddle stroke took them deeper into uncertainty, where the river could protect them or trap them forever. The mangroves swallowed their noise, leaving only the whisper of water and the pounding of their hearts. The mist thickened as the canoe glided deeper into the river's narrow channel. Every ripple felt like a warning, every shadow a hidden threat. Amara's fingers tightened around the ledger, her eyes scanning the banks where trees leaned over the water like silent watchers. A faint splash echoed behind them. Tade froze. Someone's following, he whispered. Amara leaned forward, peering through the fog. Two figures appeared on the riverbank, moving with unnatural speed, their silhouettes almost blending with the shadows. Obina's men had tracked them again, relentless and precise. Bako's paddle sliced through the water with sudden force, steering them toward a concealed side inlet. Hold on, he muttered. The river narrowed, roots clawing at the canoe, but it offered the only chance to shake their pursuers. Amara's heart raced. The ledger could expose the truth, but if they were caught now, it would all be lost. Bako guided the canoe into a narrow cavern concealed behind a thick curtain of hanging roots. The water inside was still, black, and cold, reflecting the faint morning light that filtered through cracks in the mangrove canopy. Amara and Tade exchanged glances, relief and tension warring in their eyes. This is the secret passage, Bako whispered. Few know it exists, and even fewer dare enter. The walls of the cavern pressed close on either side, roots dangling like green curtains. The sound of the river outside was muffled, leaving an eerie silence except for the gentle lapping against the canoe. Amara set the ledger on her lap, brushing her fingers over the leather cover. For a moment, the danger seemed suspended, held at bay by the cavern's shadows. Yet the river had taught her that calm waters could turn treacherous in an instant. Amara's heart sank as a shadow moved at the cavern's mouth. She and Tade froze, realizing the calm sanctuary had been discovered. A familiar figure stepped forward, one they had trusted. Musa. His eyes gleamed with guilt and fear, the ledger still clutched in Amara's hands. I had no choice, he stammered, voice trembling. Obina threatened my family. He said if I didn't lead him to you, they'd be harmed. Tade's jaw tightened. You could have told us. Musa swallowed hard. I was scared. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. Amara's fists clenched around the ledger. Betrayal stung sharper than any river current, yet she knew vengeance now would be reckless. They had to survive first, then deal with the traitor. The mangroves held their secrets, but one truth was clear. Danger was closer than ever. The mist rose thick over the river, swallowing the mangroves in a ghostly white. Amara and Tade paddled furiously, their breaths short and harsh, while Musa stumbled behind them, guilt written across his face. The sound of pursuing men grew distant, but the fog turned every shadow into a potential threat. Bako guided the canoe expertly, skimming past jagged roots and shallow banks. Keep low. Don't make a sound, he hissed. The ledger felt heavier with each stroke, a reminder of why they risked everything. Amara's mind raced with plans and contingencies. One wrong move, and Obina's men would be upon them, leaving no room for error. As the canoe slipped deeper into the fog, Amara glimpsed an opening, a bend in the river where the current would hide them. Hope and danger intertwined, each paddle stroke carrying them closer to uncertain safety. The canoe scraped against soft mud as Bako steered them into a narrow inlet, hidden behind thick reeds. Amara's legs ached, her arms trembling from hours of paddling, but relief washed over her. For now they were unseen, and the river had offered them a moment of safety. This place will hold for the day, Bako said, tying the canoe to a root. The guards won't find you here, and the fog covers our tracks. Amara set the ledger down and exhaled, finally allowing herself a small measure of calm. Tade leaned against a mangrove trunk, staring into the dark water, wary but grateful. For the first time in days, the danger felt distant. Yet they knew it was only temporary. Obina's reach was long, and the truth they carried could ignite storms far beyond the mangroves. Amara opened the leather-bound ledger carefully, flipping through pages thick with meticulous handwriting. Names, numbers, and coded entries sprawled across the yellowed sheets, chronicling decades of corruption, bribery, and stolen land. Each entry was a story of greed and betrayal, a proof of the power wielded in shadows. Tade peered over her shoulder, frowning. This could bring down Obina and his network completely, he whispered. Every illegal deal, every hidden payment. It's all here. Amara's pulse quickened. They weren't just carrying evidence. They held the truth capable of shaking the foundations of the city's elite. But as she read deeper, a chilling thought struck her. Someone would kill to get this ledger back. The river's calm outside contrasted with the storm brewing in their hands. Their mission had only just begun, and danger lurked closer than ever. Amara and Tade huddled in the hidden mangrove clearing, the ledger between them. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the water. We can't just hand this to the authorities, Amara said firmly. They're too deep in Obina's network. We need a platform everyone can see, the media, the public. No one can ignore it. Tade nodded, running his fingers over the ledger's worn cover. We'll need proof, photos, witnesses. Everything must be airtight. One mistake and they'll discredit us, or worse. They spent hours drafting a plan, mapping a route to the city, and identifying allies who could help. Each step was calculated, each contingency considered. The ledger was both their weapon and their responsibility. As darkness fell, the river whispered around them, reminding them that time was short, and that Obina's men were still searching. Before dawn, Amara, Tade, and Bako pushed the canoe into the river, moving quietly through the fog. Every paddle stroke felt like a countdown. They knew Obina's men could be anywhere, ready to strike. The river was both ally and threat, its currents carrying them forward while hiding them from prying eyes. Amara clutched the ledger tightly, feeling its weight more with each passing mile. We need to reach the city before anyone realizes we're gone, she said, voice low but determined. Tade nodded, scanning the banks for signs of pursuit. Hours passed, and the river twisted through familiar and unfamiliar channels. Each bend brought tension, each shadow a possible threat. Yet, despite exhaustion, hope flickered. They were moving toward justice, toward exposure, and toward the city where the ledger's secrets could finally shake the foundations of power. The sun climbed higher, burning away the fog but revealing the riverbanks in stark detail. Amara's heart jumped as she spotted a dark silhouette moving among the reeds. Tade froze beside her. "They found us," he whispered. Baco paddled faster, weaving the canoe through narrow channels. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made Amara flinch. One misstep could send them into the hands of Obina's men, or worse. Hours of careful navigation tested their stamina, but each close encounter strengthened their resolve. The ledger remained safe, a beacon of truth they were determined to protect. By late afternoon, the city's skyline appeared faintly on the horizon, a promise of refuge and exposure. Yet even as hope surged, the danger was far from over. Every shadow hinted at enemies waiting for the moment to strike. The river widened as they approached the outskirts of the city, the buildings rising like jagged teeth against the horizon. Amara squinted, trying to make sense of the familiar skyline from this unfamiliar angle. The safety of civilization felt both comforting and dangerous. Everyone in the city was a potential ally or a threat. Baco guided the canoe toward a secluded dock, hidden behind warehouses and overgrown reeds. "We'll leave the river here," he whispered. "From this point we move on foot. Watch for anyone following." Amara tightened her grip on the ledger. Tade scanned the streets ahead, alert for movement. Each step into the city was a risk, yet it was the only way to bring the truth to light. They had come too far to turn back now, and the ledger's secrets demanded exposure. The alley behind the warehouse was narrow and dimly lit, the smell of oil and refuse hanging heavy in the air. Amara and Tade approached cautiously, the ledger hidden beneath a worn cloth. Baco's hand hovered near his side, ready for any sudden threat. A shadow detached itself from the darkness. "You're late," a low voice said. It was Neka, a journalist who had once helped Tade with a small exposé. Her eyes scanned the river-stained clothes and the soaked ledger. "Did they follow you?" Amara shook her head. "Not yet, but Obina's men are close. We can't waste time." Neka nodded and gestured toward a nearby safe house. "Inside, we need to verify everything before going public. One mistake, and it could cost your lives." The city's chaos felt safer than the river now, but danger still lurked at every corner. Inside Neka's safe house, the air was thick with tension and the smell of brewing coffee. The room was small, crowded with stacks of papers, laptops, and recording equipment. Amara carefully laid the leather-bound ledger on the table, its pages worn and yellowed, each entry a damning record of decades of corruption. Tade and Neka leaned over, examining the intricate codes, names, and transactions that could topple Obina's network if exposed correctly. "This is explosive," Neka said, adjusting her glasses. "But we need to verify every single entry. One mistake, and they'll discredit the entire thing, and you could be silenced before it even hits the press." Amara nodded, determination etched on her face. "We've come too far to back down now. People have trusted us with their stories. Lives are at stake. The ledger is more than evidence. It's justice." Tade started photographing pages, carefully logging each name and number, while Amara cross-referenced them with the contacts they had made in the city. The clock ticked relentlessly, a reminder that Obina's men were still searching, likely closer than they realized. Hours passed as the team meticulously prepared the dossier, verifying every detail. They developed a strategy to release the information simultaneously across multiple media platforms, ensuring it would reach the public before Obina could respond. As night fell, the ledger's weight seemed lighter, replaced by a surge of hope. They were ready to expose the truth, aware that the next move could change everything, or put them directly in the path of danger. The city streets buzzed with energy as news outlets lit up with the revelations from the ledger. Screens displayed the names, dates, and transactions that exposed Obina's network of corruption, each piece corroborated by photographs, witness testimonies, and financial records meticulously compiled by Amara, Tade, and Neka. Social media exploded, with citizens sharing, discussing, and demanding accountability. In his opulent office high above the city, Obina sat frozen, staring at the cascading headlines. His empire, built on secrecy and fear, was unraveling in real time. Calls came from lawyers, partners, and even government officials demanding explanations he could no longer delay. Panic replaced his usual confidence, the realization dawning that no bribe, threat, or ally could save him now. Meanwhile, Amara and Tade stood at Neka's safe house, watching the live coverage. Relief and exhaustion mingled, but beneath it lay a deeper satisfaction. The ledger's secrets were finally public, the truth impossible to suppress. People whose lives had been crushed by Obina's greed now had hope. Later that evening, as the city lights flickered on, Amara stepped onto the balcony and breathed in the night air. The journey had been perilous, filled with betrayal, danger, and moral choices that tested their courage. But the ledger had done its work, exposing injustice, empowering the powerless, and reminding the world that even the richest could not escape the consequences of their actions. For the first time in months, Amara felt the weight lift. The river, the mangroves, and the treacherous paths behind them had led to this moment, a reckoning that would echo long after the city slept. Hey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And while you're at it, smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single update. Thank you.